There's been a bridge across the Thames in London since at least the 1st century AD. It actually predates the city. It's been destroyed many times, rebuilt, repaired. The bridge called London Bridge, which shouldn't be confused with the more striking Tower Bridge, has existed in various forms since the Roman times. Around 1000 AD, England started to face wave after wave of invasion from Viking lords and Scandinavian kings. It was a period of instability, almost constant warfare, and ever-shifting alliances. And that all came to London Bridge in the year 1014, when a future Norwegian king helped an English king recapture the city of London from a Danish army by pulling down London Bridge. It's history that deserves to be remembered. The first bridges to cross the Thames were built by the Romans. First permanent bridge was built around year 55 and given a small garrison. The bridge actually predates the settlement of London, which grew as a central trading and shipping hub the Romans would call Londinium. The first bridges were wooden pile bridges, were likely rebuilt several times, such as after the Boudiccan revolt. The bridge and the city were both essentially abandoned after Rome left the island in the 5th century. It wasn't seriously resettled until the 9th century under Alfred the Great, King of Wessex, beginning in 886. Viking invasions had plagued the island for decades, and Alfred planned to protect his citizens by building a system of fortified cities that would be safe from Viking raiders, who didn't have the time or equipment for prolonged sieges. Alfred might have rebuilt the bridge at this time, but certainly either he or one of his successors had rebuilt it before the year 1000. The Viking Age of Invasion began in northern England, at Lindisfarne, where several relics were stolen from the local monastery in 793. In 855, the so-called Great Heathen Army of Norse soldiers arrived, conquering a large piece of England that would come to be called the Danelaw, that is, land where the laws of the Danes held sway. Alfred the Great of Wessex held the Danes off, but Vikings continued to come to England to raid. In 978, Ethelred the Unready, great-great-grandson of Alfred, ascended to the throne of England. The epithet "the Unready" is poorly translated and only given to him long after his death. It actually better translates as "the ill-advised," which is something of a pun, since Ethelred means noble-advised or well-advised. The Danelaw had been reconquered by his predecessors, but during Ethelred's reign there was a resurgence of Viking raids on the English coast. In 991, a Danish fleet landed and defeated the English at the Battle of Malden, the first of a string of defeats. The English began paying tribute, called Dane gold, in exchange for peace, but the fleet seems to have continued raiding. The raids escalated to an inconclusive attack on London. Ethelred negotiated a peace that lasted several years, with many of the Danes returning home. Some, however, stayed in England, living among the English or working as mercenaries. Some of these same men grew restless, however, and rejoined Viking fleets that prompted Ethelred to again pay Dane gold for safety. Ethelred was frustrated by the recurring issue of Viking raiders and by the betrayal by the Danes living in England. According to the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, Ethelred was told the Danes in England would faithlessly take his life and then all his counselors and possess his kingdom afterwards. Ethelred ordered the Danes in his kingdom to be killed on the 13th of November, 1002, the feast day of St. Bryce. It became known as the St. Bryce's Day Massacre, and while it isn't known how many were killed, historians generally believe there was significant loss of life, including possibly Gunhilda, the sister of the Norwegian king Sven Forkbeard, and the wife of the Danish alderman of Devonshire, who also may have been killed. Sven had been King of Norway since he dethroned his father in 986. It's possible his attack on England was in retribution for his dead kin, but likely the promise of riches is just as enticing. Sven participated in several raids of England after the massacre, with the most significant being the invasion led by Thorkel the Tall in 1009. It isn't clear whether Sven supported these attacks or merely took advantage of them, but ultimately he made a fortune in Dane gold. Sven led an invasion in 1013, not just to raid, but to take the throne of England. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle reports that after landing at Sandwich, he moved north. The Earl of Northumbria bowed to him, as did the Kingdom of Lindsey, and most of the former Danelaw. He turned his eyes next on London, held by Ethelred and Thorkel, who had turned mercenary after being paid a substantial Dane gold. London held out for a time, but eventually capitulated. Before the end of 1013, Ethelred was forced to flee to exile in Normandy. Sven Forkbeard declared himself King of England on Christmas Day, 1013, ready to rule his new kingdom. But before he could cement control, the unexpected happened. He died on February 3rd, 1014, a mere 5 weeks after he had become king. His death brought renewed chaos. His eldest son, Harold II, became king in Denmark, while the people of Lindsey and the Viking army in England declared his son Canute king of England. The English Witan of the Anglo-Saxon Council did not agree. They sent for Ethelred in Normandy to return to his throne. Sven and Canute had apparently been unable to realize true control over their newly conquered territory. Ethelred returned and paid Thorkel and his surviving men to help him retake England. Sven had realized that London was the key to controlling the kingdom and left the city well garrisoned. Scandinavian skalds or poets wrote that London Bridge was especially well defended. Ethelred was forced then to retake the heavily defended city from the invaders that had so recently taken it. One solution would be to destroy the bridge itself, which would effectively cut the defending forces in two. Olaf Haraldsson, a future King of Norway and a very important figure in Norwegian history, volunteered for the job. Today known as Saint Olaf and given the title Eternal King of Norway, after his death he has been written about extensively in the skaldic poetic tradition of the Vikings. Much of his early life is uncertain, but he may have participated in campaigns with Thorkel before. Olaf's idea was to take rafts and cover them with heavy thatched roofs taken from local buildings, thus protecting his men from arrows or spears thrown from the bridge above, and to use them to physically pull down the bridge. He led his boats up the river from the sea, and he and his men found themselves perfectly safe from the defenders under the roofs when they wrapped ropes around the bridge's supports. The boats then sailed back downriver with as much force as possible. It isn't certain they actually pulled down the bridge, but they likely did significant damage. A skaldic line reads that Olaf broke the bridges of London. Olaf, Thorkel, and Ethelred retook London and then the rest of England. Canute left England only 2 months after Sven's death. Ethelred was restored as King of England, but not for long. His son, Edmund Ironside, rebelled against his father, finding support with the people of Lindsey and the Danelaw. When Canute invaded in 1015, Edmund rejoined his father to defend London, but after years of strife, Ethelred died in April 1016. Canute defeated Edmund decisively, but allowed him to keep the kingdom of Wessex, at least until Edmund, too, died in September. It has been suggested that Olaf's destruction of the bridge was the inspiration for the song London Bridge is Falling Down. Scholarly research has cast doubt on that idea, however. Similar rhymes were common throughout Europe, but the most recent versions of the London Bridge rhyme date from the 17th century, and in its modern version from the 19th. In 1844, a translation of the Viking sagas about Olaf wrote this: London Bridge is broken down, gold is won in bright renown, shields resounding, war horns sounding, Hilders shouting in the den, arrows singing, mailcoats ringing, Odin, make our Olaf win. However, it's a rather free translation of the actual work, and it's clear that the translator used the rhyme London Bridge is Falling Down as a base. Olaf's bridge assault is not mentioned in any of the English sources, which has led some scholars to doubt that it actually even happened. Scholars have suggested other possible origins. In the 19th century, folklorist Alex Gaume recorded that the song and the game that accompanied it were referencing a tradition of trapping live people in the foundations of the bridge as sacrifices that would keep it standing longer. Archaeological research has found no evidence of this practice actually being used, however. The bridge that crossed the Thames was often in disrepair, was badly damaged or destroyed by a tornado in 1091, burned in 1136. At enormous expense, a stone bridge was completed in 1209, which quickly became overrun with wooden buildings and shops, which presented a serious fire hazard. Sustained damage from a fire in 1633, which was not rebuilt and served as a fire break to stop the Great Fire of 1666 from spreading across the river. In the 18th century, it was redesigned so as to create larger channels between its arches to accommodate river traffic. In 1831, the bridge that had stood for 600 years was replaced by the New London Bridge, which stood until 1967, when it was replaced by the Modern Bridge. The new bridge was purchased and rebuilt in Lake Havasu City, Arizona. After Edmund's death, Canute became the sole king of England and was actually a good ruler. He became known as Canute the Great. He and his sons ruled for the next 26 years. And in 1042, Edward the Confessor, who was a son of Ethelred, ascended to the throne. The story of the Viking attack on London Bridge really represents the patchwork nature of Europe at the time. It wasn't only England that was facing constant raiders who would attack, carve out small kingdoms, and face dynastic strife. Europe was a patchwork of kingdoms and would-be kings and raiders, and that future King of Norway and saint would help an English king to recover his kingdom from a Danish dynasty that had only ruled England for a few months was not so much an outlier, but representative of a time of constant conflict and shifting alliances and allegiances that would eventually coalesce into something more like the modern map of Europe that we recognize today. But behind all that was the bridge, the strategic key to the City of London and to the kingdom itself. Today, London Bridge carries the A3 road, which is in some parts called the London or the Portsmouth Road, and it's built very near where the original bridge was built by the Romans. A bridge that has connected humans and history across 2 millennia.